Today, I'm going to answer some frequently asked questions that we get from clients on a day-to-day basis. If they're wondering about it, I'm sure you are too. So let's get started. First off, who hires private investigators? Well, a variety of folks can hire private investigators, anything from consumers to lawyers to insurance companies to brand owners to business owners. Bottom line is that private investigators can get work from a variety of sources. In most situations, investigators are working on legal matters involving civil or criminal matters before some sort of a court or some sort of insurance claims. Another question I get a lot is, do you have to have a license to be a private investigator? The short answer is yes. In most situations, depending on which state you're in, you need a license to do investigative work. However, if you work for a law firm that is licensed to practice, you can do investigation work under their law practice. You do not need to be licensed. In order to get a license in California, you need to work for an agency for approximately 3 years, full-time work doing investigative services, and then you qualify to take an examination, which gives you a license with the state and allows you to do business with the general public. This is a good one. If you do a background check on someone, will they be alerted or find out that they're being investigated? This is a great question. If you're doing investigation research and digging up dirt on someone, you definitely don't want them to be notified. In the investigative world, discrete background investigations, asset searches, locates, and any other kind of investigations are done discreetly and will not involve contact with the subject, nor should they be alerted. I love this one. So how is an investigation done by a licensed investigation or a licensed investigation firm different than a Westlaw, Lexis, NEXIS, or other database search run by an individual, consumer, or a law firm or insurance company? We get this quite a bit. The client wants to know how an investigation done by our firm is different than what they can get through their available resources. And there's a lot of good ones out there. However, the investigative resources out there are not comprehensive in nature and do not cover every state, every court, every DMV across the United States. So an investigator understands where those gaps are and then is conducting public records research and other proprietary databases to make sure that the investigation report is complete, thorough, and accurate. Also, the information from a database report procured by a law firm through Lexis or IRB or TLO or Westlaw, the information there is not verified, and thus the information cannot be turned into a report and presented in support of a declaration or a motion or before a court, because it's in essence just a data dump from available sources. Great question. This one comes up quite often. Can you locate somebody if you just have their name? And the short answer is yes. Obviously, if the person has a common name, this is much more difficult, but generally speaking, if the person has an uncommon name and we generally know where they maybe lived, worked, or resided, we have a good chance of identifying who they are, verifying a social, date of birth, and running database searches, and then verifying the identity so we can track them down for the purposes of maybe an interview, surveillance, or serving them with legal documents. But in short, if you just have someone's name, it is possible to locate the true identity and where they might be. Can a private investigator serve legal papers? The short answer is yes. Under the Business and Professions Code in California, private investigators are exempt from registration as a process server and can serve process. However, many private investigation firms either staff or work with outside process servers to handle process serve assignments for them. This comes up from time to time when you're tracking down someone to get them served. Oftentimes, a private investigator may conduct stakeout to get somebody served, surveillance, and do other investigative techniques that are required to effect service on an evasive target or someone that's just very difficult to track down. Do all private investigators carry guns? It's a great question. The answer is really it depends. Many investigators are former law enforcement or possess permits to carry guns, but not all investigators do. If you're conducting surveillance in foreign areas, it may be a wise idea to get a permit to carry a gun, but it's not required. And most investigators are doing desktop research, interviews, and there's no real threats. There's no real reason to carry a gun. Additionally, if you're working for a licensed investigation agency and the personnel are carrying guns, it requires a whole different kind of insurance to do that. And if you're just doing investigations and not security, it's not recommended, as the liability and risk associated with that is just not necessary, and it's not required to do typical investigation work. Are all private investigators former cops? The answer is no. Many private investigators do come from a law enforcement background, whether a state, federal agency, and they transition as they retire into the private sector. However, in order to become a private investigator in many states, you're not required to be a former law enforcement military officer or law enforcement officer. In the state of New York, as an example, there is a requirement that you are former law enforcement in order to get a private investigator license, but it's not a requirement. Many people in this space do have the skills that transfer over from law enforcement and are working as private investigators, but again, it's not a requirement. If the client has a license plate, can an investigator tell who owns the car? Short answer is yes. In many states, you can get the registered owner, lien owner, legal owner information from the DMV state by state. Every state varies. For instance, in California, we get names only, we don't get addresses. In other states like Arizona, you will get an address. But the short answer is if you have the plate or VIN of a vehicle, you can run that through the DMV and determine the registered owner and the lien holder, their name. And then from there, you can locate them. If the state provides an address, then obviously that's a good lead to determine where the person might be living, working, residing, and so forth. Great question. This one comes up quite a bit. How much does it cost to hire a private investigator? The answer to this question is it really varies. Many services that we offer locates assets, backgrounds, asset searches. Those are done on a flat fee basis, anywhere from $300 to $800 or $1,000 or more. Many investigators bill by the hour, anywhere from $75 to $250 an hour. It really depends on the type of investigative work being done and where it's being conducted. Some investigators have a minimum, but really you can come up with a custom investigative plan that meets most budgets. And all investigators work a little bit differently, but it's not all that expensive to retain an investigator for basic assignment like a locate or an asset check or a background. But another great question. This one comes up quite often. Is it legal to hire a private investigator to work on a family law case? The answer is yes. However, it's important to understand that in the jurisdiction wherever the case is being heard or seen, that the investigator is following the rules and ethics and compliance guidelines that are required. For instance, in California, if there's a family law case, it's not ethical to put a tracker on someone's car that's not owned by your client. And it's not really a recommended practice in many other states as well. As another example, if one party in a family law case has a restraining order against the other, the restrained party is not authorized to conduct surveillance or make contact or to violate that order. So it's important the investigator asks these types of questions and follows ethical and legal guidelines, but it's within the law to conduct surveillance, do background research in family law cases, assuming that there's a permissible reason, meaning there's litigation and there's potential harm, and that this information can be used in court. We always recommend that investigations involving family law are directed through counsel to keep them privileged and confidential, and also the attorney can keep a watchful eye on the case and the client and make sure that the ethical and legal boundaries are being followed. If you have any other questions that come up that you're wondering about, that you want us to answer on a future show, please let us know. Thank you.